Welcome to Advisor Abbate's personal YouTube channel, AA Video Channel. Advice you can trust. I'm your host, Caio Goncalves, and today AA and I are here to talk to you about international affairs.
Hello.
Our focus this episode will be Europe. AA, there's something really interesting going on in Europe right now. After Macron's decisive victory in France, and his quick emergence on the world stage as a champion for Europeans' integration really stands in direct contrast to Prime Minister May and her conservative agenda in England, especially after Brexit. After her loss in Parliament, really what is next for the European Union? Some say perhaps the populist revolt that was going to perhaps happen in the European Union was imminent. Now others are saying that may have been a premature assessment. What is next for the EU, and really how are other countries going to fare in this divisive political environment?
What Europeans leaders need is courage to give up their personal agenda in favor of what's best for the population. Europeans, and primarily the French and the Italians, but the Spaniards not any less, have a long history of bureaucratic processes. And people that have a certain amount of power have a very difficult time letting it go. And so we have these individuals with ultra-liberal ideas who have amassed a certain amount of wealth, and they like the circumstances as they are. They like to continue to be the wealthy people that are in charge. This reminds me a little bit of the area of the Bourbons, where they like to have the most of the population in poverty, so they would have control over them. The issue is, if the population continues to become more and more poor, then we are in a great detriment. And if everybody continues to complain about the Germans and how well their economy is doing, at one point the Germans start acting more like the southern Italians and the other lower Mediterranean areas and say, why are we working so hard? Let's start working a little bit less. And I like to see how further down Europe is going to be. So currently it's a sad story. It's been a sad story for a while. It continues to be with the immigration issues. I am no fan of Macron. I wasn't not hoping that he would win the election. I am all for the passage that May made. I am all for the Brexit. And I don't see the European Union functioning well as everyone had hoped that it would be. I would like to see each independent nation being a little bit more self-assertive and being a little bit more center-right, than center-left.
Is it your hope that other nations will follow suit, perhaps, in the Brexit movement and kind of go against the ideal that staying in the EU is beneficial to the entire continent?
I believe that the movement of the economy in the European community makes sense, allowing countries to trade with each other. But we had that for many, many, many years, for decades. And the introduction of the euro didn't quite benefit all the countries in an equal way. So I am not pro-euro myself. I believe that you have countries with very long histories, traditions, cultural differences, and you cannot ask those countries and those people to all run at the same speed. And as a result, you have this divergences in political opinion and in creating economic instability. I don't think it was a good idea. In theory, it was a good idea, but in practice, we found it's proved to be otherwise.
Now, this attack used the same hacking tools that were stolen from the National Security Agency back in April. And many around the world, specifically in Europe, are calling for the NSA to come to the aid of governments in Europe to defend them against the weapons that the agency created itself. Do you agree with that statement, that the NSA should, and Trump's administration, but the NSA specifically, should work with European governments to protect them from these attacks?
I mean, I believe if the members of the alliance are seeking help from each other, or specifically from the US government, has proven and shown to have leadership in this technology, I mean, why not? I mean, they are collaborating with us already on the transatlantic protection, but why not give them the help that they are seeking? And they should pay for it.
Are you saying in Europe, the governments who are
almost
outsourcing intelligence?
Absolutely. I think you're asking for a service and you should pay for it, or in whatever form participate in this expense.
The EU has just slapped a $2.7 billion fine on tech giant Google, which is a record for an American company. The EU charges Google with denying consumers a genuine choice by steering them to Google's own shopping platform. Do you see this unprecedented action as the first of many against American companies in the form of antitrust fines?
Well, first we should look at the facts. Isn't it true? Doesn't that to a certain extent happen here? I mean, we commonly discuss, have you Googled this, have you Googled that? So essentially they have a monopoly. In the US, we have seen it when AT&T was a pioneer and a leader in the industry of telephones, where it was mobile or fixed, and then the government asked them to split up. I often wonder, why haven't they done so with Google yet? Somebody must have some special interests in this company that is asking them or has been waiting for this. So sure, I agree with the Europeans.
Do you think the U.S. and Silicon Valley should be in a way responsible for overseeing our American companies, what they're doing overseas as well, and helping in a way to police those actions before they take place?
There are already some policies in place for corporate
sure, regulations, and of course, yeah. But I'm saying if this was able to happen in the first place in Europe, right, and we got slapped with this, yeah. Not we personally, but Google, right, an American company, has faced this level of a fine, is it an indictment that our federal agencies that are supposed to be overseeing and regulating are failing overseas? Well,
we can't expect that our government in the U.S. is going to be able to police completely what our organizations, U.S. organizations, are doing abroad. I mean, that's for the EU to do, to protect their territories, as it is for us to protect our territories in the U.S. from foreign companies that are doing certain activities here. So now there would be outreaching, and who knows if the EU government would appreciate that. So clearly anything that has to do with the EU and the government of the U.S. wants to collaborate with them, then they need to approach the EU government or the EU Parliament first in these prospects. Collaborate.
Right.
But not completely police what our companies are doing in Europe. I mean, it's not their jurisdiction.
Shifting gears a little bit, earlier you touched the subject of immigration in Europe, so I want to talk about that. It's really no secret that Europe's current refugee asylum program is not sustainable. But a recent study done by Stanford scholars found that Europeans favored an allocation system proportional to each country's capacity, even when it meant that the number of asylum seekers and refugees in their respective country could increase. So the question is, should Europeans, head of states, increase the number of asylum seekers in their country if they're able to do so, or is it already a problem that is just beyond their control?
First, they should stop the influx of illegal immigration at its source, whether it be in North Africa or wherever they're coming from, because it's simply not sustainable. And none of these countries have created a complete integration program for these foreigners who are living in sub-civil, substandard environments and are not accustomed to the type of civility that they encounter when they arrive in Western Europe. I mean, they don't know how to act in a circumstance like this. That's not the standard of living that they are used to. So identify who they are at the source, collaborate with the local governments, invest some of this money to create environments where are conducive to creating jobs and proper living there in the country of origin, because we know statistically that over 80% of these migrants are economic migrants, are not refugees. They don't qualify for refugee status. So knowing this, the money should be invested by the European Union in Libya, which is primarily where these migrants are coming from, but also in other parts, and collaborate with those governments and invest there. Create centers there to mitigate these circumstances. But Europe is not prepared for this kind of influx. And it's a detriment to the migrants also because they're not being integrated. They're just being used as an economic advantage by certain governments and the criminals that take advantage of whatever amount of money the EU is using as a subsidy for Greece, for Italy, and other areas.
But do you think that the Middle Eastern countries would be open to intervention from Europe to come into their countries, Libya, for example, come into Libya and develop this market for their migrants who otherwise would be going to Italy, wherever in Western Europe, and actually stay there? Do you think they would be receptive to that, or is that just beyond diplomatic boundaries or things that could happen there?
I believe that if any country is unable to maintain order in their nation, and this inability to maintain order in their nation is causing economic instability and loss of human life in neighboring nations, then those neighboring nations that are suffering from this need to take an assertive position and impose this on the nation that is unable to control their environment. It's no different than a war. It's a different type of war. But if you start bombing me from across the sea, I'm going to retaliate. This is a different way of creating a war. Almost all of the migrants, illegal migrants, for economic reason and as refugees that are departing from Libya are not from Libya. So it's clear that this is an economic advantage for the Lebanese. Government and non-government who are taking advantage of this trafficking. This is human trafficking we're talking about. So because we know as a fact that these are not Lebanese people living in Libya, so we know the Lebanese are taking advantage of this human trafficking. They are in essence criminals who are causing this impact on Western Europe, and they must be stopped. I don't know why it's taking so long from taking an assertive position, other than this is the usual course of business for the Europeans. They take too long to make any decisions. They just waste too much time.
Who personally, if you had to, obviously it's tough to assign blame to any single nation, any single leader, but if you had to name specifically one nation or one head of state that you are looking for leadership and you, more than any other ones, to kind of stand up and say, enough is enough with this crisis, this is where we're going to do, and other nations should follow us. If you could name someone or a nation that you expect, or
certainly, I think the first nation to blame is Vatican City. The first nation to blame is the Pope, who is at the head of his government, and it's because of the Pope being in Italy, Italy is acting like this. The Catholic Church is their influence with their thought of save the world is causing this confusion, this havoc, these losses for the Italian people, for the Italian citizens, for the Italian government. This is the root of the behavior.
I want to thank AA for the insightful conversation we've had today.
Thank you.
And now we have a question actually posed to AA from the audience. And this person from the audience wants to know, if you had to say, pick one country in the world that you're observing right now, what is the best place to do business internationally emerging?
The best platform to conduct business in the Middle East would be Hong Kong. It's not an emerging market, but it gives you the opportunity to reach out to the rest of Asia, where there are many other countries that are emerging and continue to develop. Why would you want to do business in Hong Kong, for example, and not specifically in the emerging market? Because Hong Kong gives you the stability of an Anglo-Saxon system and banking, international banking, and that allows you to have a secure platform with a judicial system that is very accurate for that specific area, for the whole Southeast Asia, mainland China, and including Singapore, because Singapore is no match for banking when it comes to conducting business as Hong Kong. There are some potentials in Eastern Europe, but personally, unless a country gives me the complete stability
from the judicial system where is effective in prosecuting people that don't pay their bills or that commit a crime or fraud of any type, I am very reluctant in doing business there or in advising our clients to establish the company there. It's better to be in a jurisdiction which is very reliable and then reaching out from there as a platform. The U.S. is an example. There are different states within a country that could use more development, but it's safe to say that anywhere in any state within the U.S. you have a certain level of reliability when it comes to the judicial system. Not so in Western Europe. For example, countries like Italy is an example that you don't want to automatically recommend Italy as a platform for doing business as in Western Europe, because the bureaucratic systems are essentially way too long. And we're working with the government to improve these systems, and we hope to see some improvements quickly so that we can recommend more businesses to use Italy as a platform to the rest of Europe. But clearly Britain is going to be an advantageous area as a result of the Brexit. Right now everybody is discussing about the potential loss, economic loss from Brexit. I believe in the long term it's going to be advantageous for making investments and for using Britain as an international independent platform for business into the rest of Western Europe as well.
We invite our viewers to continue sending AA questions and to tune in to next week's episode. We'll be discussing balancing personal life and your career.
Cheers.
Thank you.
We invite all of our viewers online to submit questions in the comment section. Each week, we will select a question to be answered by AA on the webcast. If you want to follow us, please find Advisor Abbate on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and we thank you for your time.